I'm holding a copy of a May 1, 2017 paper from the Southern Poverty Law Center, the title of which is "The Battle for Berkeley. In the name of freedom of speech, the radical right is circling the ivory tower to ensure a voice for the alt-right." Could you please describe for us the thrust of this paper?
Thank you, Senator Feinstein. At Berkeley, and in particular, as protests have escalated, so has the presence of groups that really have violence on their minds. We've had the kind of anti-fascist descend on Berkeley, and in response to them, we've had groups such as the Oath Keepers, law enforcement, current and former law enforcement officials who take a pledge to uphold the Constitution in their view, not as it might be interpreted by the courts or their superiors. We've had other radical right groups, the Proud Boys, a new group called the Alt Knights, come to college campuses really raring for a fight. My sympathy goes out to the university's officials at Berkeley because they have been faced with an increasingly incendiary situation. It's one of the reasons why I think it's really quite important for public officials at all levels, people in our churches, our synagogues, and our mosques, to do what they can to tamp down the rhetoric and really speak out on behalf of the values of our democracy.
One of the problems that I have is that there is an expectation that the university handles it. The handling of it means that you have resources to be able to send, and those resources know what to do. Particularly for the public university, and particularly for the University of California, there is a constant battle with the legislature over money.
Yes.
So the resources are not always what they might be. Do you accept what Mr. Cohen has said? How should a university handle this?
If I can speak to, if I can speak briefly to that, I appreciate the resource constraints. I teach at UC. We're aware of the resource constraints. Yeah. This having been said, while we're fortunate to have UC Police Department, we also are in a city, and perhaps there are some.
But that's Berkeley.
Yes, and I would think that Berkeley Police Department will also be able and should be willing to lend police officers to help out. If we are in a position where our police departments are unable to protect free speech, whether at universities or otherwise, then yes, indeed, we are in a very bad position. But my sense is...
Let me,
yes.
Professor, let me just understand what you're saying. No matter who comes, no matter what disturbance, the university has to be prepared to handle it. It's the problem for the university. That's the argument you're making. You're making the argument that a speaker that might fulminate a big problem should never be refused.
Senator, I'm always hesitant to say should never. There always are extraordinary circumstances. What if somebody's planted a bomb?
Well, to me, the extraordinary circumstance is when people come in black uniforms and hit other people over the head. That's an extraordinary circumstance.
Right, and that cannot be enough to justify suppression of those whom they came to try to suppress. That it's not just the university, it's the government. It's the job of the government. I'm not a big believer in large jobs for the government, but one important job of the government is to prevent violence, and to prevent violence without suppressing free speech. So I do think that between the, let's say my own UCLA, between the UC Police Department...
You don't think we learned a lesson at Kent State way back when?
If I may, as the one person in this room who's actually had to make these kinds of decisions, the way to start with this is with a strong presumption in favor of the speech, particularly if it's speech that's coming from a student group who's invited somebody. If an outside group wishes to come to campus, that's a different set of issues, certainly for a private university, to a certain extent even for a public university. That we have the resources to throw at all of these problems is a vastly exaggerated notion of what universities can do. So I think if you start with the presumption in favor of finding a way to get to the program, and only if that can be overcome, then you don't have a program on campus.
No matter how radical, offensive, biased, prejudiced, fascist the program is, you should find a way to accommodate it.
If we're talking about the substance of the program, not the danger and credible threats, but the substance of the program, then yes, then I do think that the program, if a student group invites, then they should be able to. However, I would say a flat rule of mine was if a speaker comes to campus, he or she better be prepared to answer questions. And what I would tell supporters, donors, alumni who would say, how can you have so-and-so speak on campus? I would say, trust my kids. Trust my kids to ask them hard questions, to ask them pointed questions. That's how we'll get to the truth.
But here's the problem. It very often isn't your kids that are the problem. It's outsiders who come with a specific program to disturb and hurt, candidly.
Well, then you're quite right. And then with a private university, you do have the option of saying, this is an event that is closed to university students. Members of the university community are invited, and only members of the university community are invited. Our obligation is to educate.
Public university?
Public university obviously has a much more significant problem there, and I would be deferential to the Chancellor of Berkeley or the President of the University of California to have to make a very tough judgment call, particularly in the cases that you were describing.
Which, I might say, are more real than I think a hopeful audience might think. I appreciate free speech. You know, those of us that run for office, we run for office on the basis of being able to speak freely. It's another thing to agitate. It's another thing to foment. And it's another thing to attack.
Well, I think in many of these speeches, and it is one of the things that a president would take into account, if a speaker is coming to campus for the purpose of agitating, cases of speakers who post images of students on screens in order to intimidate or humiliate those students, that has no place on a university campus. That's not an intent to communicate, that's an intent to intimidate.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.